choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that challenge.
For the past decades, the Republican Party has run with fear being their centralized message. The fear was seen in many faces: the abortion fight, gun rights, and now so-called voters' rights, which is really a poorly veiled cover for an attempted coup d'etat. And now their base is driven by this form of, quote, us versus them campaigning, meant to take advantage of Americans' emotions. And while certainly some of the past lies have had huge effects, where we are now, these lies, posing such, quote, threats as Antifa, BLM, and Defund the Police, are the most heinous and untrue. So, honestly, what even are these threats? Or rather, what do Republican leadership say these threats are? And what do real Republican citizens think of these threats? And is this really all, quote, radical leftism, or has fear-mongering really distorted this much of our reality? First, let's speak to Antifa. In the wake of the violent murder of George Floyd, then President Trump tweeted out that he would be working to classify Antifa as an official terrorist organization, citing apparent large-scale violence at the BLM and George Floyd rallies after his death. However, with this being said, according to Time magazine, 93% of the Black Lives Matter protests were completely peaceful, no violence. So the stance of BLM being this naturally violent organization is just simply empirically not true, or it's untrue to a level of absolute certainty. Again, 93% of protests were peaceful. But back to Antifa, what is it? What damages have they created or even incited? And most importantly, is the conservative public's negative, almost bordering on hateful view of this quote-unquote organization warranted, or simply another unfounded lie built to advance their own power? Antifa first rose to a national standing following the far-right white supremacist Unite the Right rally at Charlottesville in 2017, where self-proclaimed neo-Nazis killed a protester. And yes, many of the counter-protesters at this rally were carrying the banners and ideology of Antifa, or anti-fascism technically. But I will point out, they were counter-protesting self-proclaimed neo-Nazis, which are literally fascists, so take that as you will. But back to the point, Antifa is not an organization with a leadership team or a bureaucracy, but simply an idea. The idea that fascism, the tool of so many white supremacists and dictators, has no place within the self-proclaimed citadel of democracy that is the United States of America. In political talk, Antifa would be labeled as a dispersed network coordinating anti-fascist and anti-racist activism on what's called an ad hoc basis, meaning actions are taken with an ideological purpose in mind only, not for self or group empowerment. And at its core, Antifa seems to believe that Hitler could have never have risen to power in the 20s and 30s if the German people were taking a living, breathing, active role in their politics. I actually can't help but kind of disagree with this. In my opinion, Hitler was relatively inevitable between not only the social burdens in Germany following such a major defeat in World War I, but also the economic burdens that were placed upon Germany by the Treaty of Versailles and the Allied powers. 2 points to keep in mind though. Researchers do recognize the origins of Antifa to be set within the anti-establishment or anarchist camps, meaning they don't come from the best of places. However, as our second point made, since the 2016 election, both the message behind Antifa and just the general personality of those protesting or counter-protesting in the name of Antifa changed dramatically. Now today in 2021, the majority of direct activism done in the name of Antifa is by way of a technique known as doxing, essentially a term describing the actions of exposing someone's personal beliefs, oftentimes in the hope that it will destroy the target's career or social life. And to be clear, this is a tactic that hinges on being unethical by nature, leading to many other activist groups to denounce the movement and its techniques. Yet, despite all this, the majority of actions taken under the banner of Antifa have been peaceful. However, there have been violent attacks carried out in the name of Antifa. But just to be clear, we do believe it to be ridiculous to categorize an entire movement based on the actions of a few extremist individuals. But in the spirit of thoroughness and transparency, let's take a look. A good example of some of the rare violence occurred under the name of Antifa would be in 2017 when we saw Molotov cocktails be thrown and property damaged, all under the event of a speaker coming to the University of Berkeley spouting quite incredibly far-right viewpoints. And again though, after these events, a bipartisan condemnation rang out clear. It's important to point out the difference between that reaction and the reaction to the 2017 Charlottesville riots, where people were literally spouting neo-Nazi ideology. And not to cut it short, but truthfully, Antifa is just a cornerstone, just a piece of this many-faceted ideology the right identifies as, quote, radical leftism. In 2013, after the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murderer, George Zimmerman, 3 history-altering women founded Black Lives Matter: Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi, all for the advancement of Black political influence and Black quality of life across America, and now the globe to an extent. And both in 2013 and up until 2021, this movement has been mischaracterized to the advancement of conservative efforts, meaning, as we'll see, BLM has consistently been used as a talking point for conservative ideology, meant to keep the racial status quo as is. And in response to BLM, conservative factions have started counter-protests, if you can call them that, such as Blue Lives Matter and All Lives Matter, born of pure ignorance. And both of these counter-ideologies are built to drive the messaging about BLM into falsehood. Democrats and liberals alike understand BLM to be rooted in the general injustices placed upon Black Americans due simply to the color of their skin. However, conservatives write BLM to mean that Black lives are more important or solely important, which is just untrue. Then, this is further distorted by those claiming that, quote, all lives matter, posing it as a counter-protest to Black Lives Matter. Therefore, in contrast to the unfounded and rhetorical All Lives Matter, BLM appears to claim that only Black Lives Matter, which is curtailing not only the actual messaging but also the entire point behind the movement. But unfortunately, much like Antifa, BLM, at least in our context, doesn't even need to be violent. Conservative media don't really care about what actions took place, especially after 2016. They simply hear Black and think violence without even attempting to understand the movement. And I understand some people may be upset with that opinion, but come on, just watch television. It is blatantly clear. And now, after we've covered Antifa and BLM and shown you some similarities, let's finally get to the most modern movement, a 2020 movement in response to the murder of George Floyd: Defund the Police. And in complete fairness, this is not the most easily distinguishable title to attach to your movement, such as maybe demilitarize the police. A more accurate title to the actual intentions would be helpful. But again, the differences between the truth of Defund the Police and its portrayal by conservative media could not be any more different or damaging and just plain inaccurate. According to the American Civil Liberties Union, or the ACLU, not only were American police founded in slave patrol, defunding the police means to cut the astronomical amount that our government spends on law enforcement and give that to more helpful services like job training, counseling, and violence prevention programs, to just quote a few. And this, quote, astronomical amount does not come without backing evidence, as just at the local and state levels, so no federal money taken into account, an average of $100 billion is spent solely on law enforcement each year. This is undeniably a massive amount of money going into a broken system, as many go nights without food on the table in our very same communities. This is, or rather none of this, is how conservatives speak of defund the police. And the reasons are key. For many conservatives, defunding the police has a very specific and oftentimes unfounded consequence. According to many conservative talking points as well, defunding the police would not only open our streets to more violence, drugs, and abuse, it would do so immediately. Not only is this claim iffy in its very validity, it is built on the backs of racism and more recently Reagan's war on drugs. So now, between these talking points, BLM, Antifa, and Defund the Police, we feel now that conservative pundits' opinions and definitions of those opinions and of radical leftism, quote-unquote, have been thoroughly explained and covered. And so now quickly, we want to touch on some of the research that's been done analyzing the amount of population that supports these conservative definitions, beliefs, and ideological wars. According to Newsweek, a popular conservative news channel, a fantastic example of Republican voters' opinions on Antifa is that 69% of Republicans polled believe Antifa was involved in the Trump-led insurrection on our Capitol on January 6th, meaning that Antifa, not Trump supporters, were the ones that tried to invade the Capitol. But really, this just exposes how the right's lies about Antifa are meant to take hold. They provide a near perfect, quote, boogeyman for the Republicans, and with no leadership structure to speak on the ideology's behalf, conservative discussions on Antifa quickly often falls into conspiracy theory, as no one's there to defend them. This now leads us again to BLM, where many similar lies have taken hold about the purposes and actions partaken by the organization. And yes, it is an organization this time. However, as we'll see, organization or not, it's still difficult to fight lies and slander. Simply, according to Pew Research, only 20% of white Republicans support BLM, which truly is all of the information needed, as this is in contrast to the nearly 65% of Dems who answered they either strongly supported or slightly supported Black Lives Matter. This division between party lines is certainly part of the core issue here. The tribalism between Dems and Republicans further exaggerates the arguments, distorting the truth even further. And so in conclusion, to put it into perspective, none of this, quote, radical leftism is actually very radical. It is certainly left, though, and the right's support of this racist campaign won't end anytime soon. So research and understanding must be pressed as a priority. If the USA ever wants to resolve these divisions critically and deeply, we will first have to come to terms with why conservatives push fear to the constituency about radical leftism in the first place, and move forward together. And for the future of us all, we better get educated and find solutions.